Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Thursday afternoon. And there's a lot of stuff that we got to talk about in these few segments. So, in the first one, we're going to do a little preview of Notre Dame going up against Penn State. One of the two college football playoff matches that is going to go down. This one's happening today, and then the other one is going to happen tomorrow. That other game is going to be Ohio State versus Texas, so I'll talk about that after this game. So tomorrow on Friday, I'll definitely talk about my predictions for that game. And then in the second segment, we're going to talk about Atlanta, the Falcons. They wouldn't mind keeping Kirk Cousins on the bench, which I think is really weird, so I'm going to talk about that in the second segment. And then in the third segment, we're going to give a little update on the Jimmy Butler trade. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of updates on Jimmy Butler and where he's going to end up going for, I think, throughout this weekend and all the way up until the trade deadline, honestly, because we have no idea what team is interested in him and who wants to trade for him. And then in the fourth segment, we're going to talk about UCLA's head coach and sort of what he had to say going into and how he might have lost the locker room, because what he said in the post-game interview was actually very surprising. I wasn't expecting a head coach to say that about their players, but we're going to talk about that in the fourth segment. And we also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that if you guys are interested. Before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, or it's something that you're dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. If Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, GSMCpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments like that as well. Either or really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead, get into this college football playoff game and what I think is going to happen. So this is going to be the matchup between Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish, and the Penn State Nittany Lions. Now, compared to all the other games that happened in the college football playoffs, I think this one is going to be like the most back and forth game we've seen so far. We've seen close game. Not really close games. We've seen a close game already. That was Texas going up against Arizona State. That was the closest game of the entirety of the college football playoffs. And while it was close, it wasn't back and forth. Arizona just was able to make a comeback in the second half of the game and looked like they were almost going to win, but ultimately Texas ended up showing why they were the better team and why they belong in the SEC. And while that game was close, again, it wasn't back and forth. I think this game is going to be pretty back and forth. This is going to be a really gritty game. Both of these teams are really good at running the ball. Not, in my opinion at least, not very strong at the quarterback position. I know Penn State's quarterback has been having a really solid year, but I'm just not that big of a fan of him. That's just me, though. I'm sure most of you guys would disagree with that, especially all of you Penn State fans. But I really think this is going to be the game is going to be decided by which team can run the ball more effectively and which team can get the most stops on defense. And I think it's going to be relatively back and forth. Now, I don't think it's going to be like a really high scoring game, like nowhere near as high of a scoring game as Ohio State going up against Oregon. But then again, Ohio State was doing most of the scoring there. I don't think it's going to be that high of a scoring game. I think it's going to be a little bit of a low scoring. Maybe both teams end up scoring around like 20 points, but that's about it. Because both of these teams, in my opinion, like their passing game is still a little bit meh, and I think both defenses are really, really good. And because of that, I think it's going to mitigate the rest of the other team's offense, whichever side. And really, it's going to come down to whichever team can end up breaking off either a big play or a big run to win the game in the end. And the team that I have winning in this matchup between these two teams is not the Nittany Lions. And normally I would have picked them, but I'm going to go ahead and pick Notre Dame in this one. I know Notre Dame has a history of disappointing its fans, and they have, they don't really, whenever they do make it into a playoff game, or whenever they do play a playoff game, they almost always disappoint. But I think it's going to be different this time. And there's also a former teammate of mine that's on Notre Dame, RJ Oben. He plays on the defensive line, and he's a starter for that team. I really hope that he succeeds. Obviously, you want your former teammates to succeed in whatever it is that they do. And similar to Cody Simon on Ohio State, I would love to see them succeed and win this important game, because these types of games are the type of games that scouts are going to tune into, and it could end up boosting your draft stock. Like, I wasn't entirely sure whether Cody Simon was going to get drafted, but once he became the defensive player of the last game that Ohio State played against Oregon, then my opinion on that completely changed. I think that a lot of teams were going to look into that a little bit more closely. And really, I really hope for a good game in this one, because it's been a very lackluster NCAA postseason, in my personal opinion. A lot of these games, we only had one close game, and the rest of the teams that were in the college football playoffs, a lot of people are making the argument that they didn't even belong in the college football playoffs, and that maybe you need to bring in some other SEC teams, or maybe a team like Boise State should not have been in that situation. And to be honest, I think that Boise State kind of got unlucky in terms of going up against Penn State, because Penn State had the perfect counter to Boise State and their and since Boise State is heavily reliant on the rush, Penn State was very good at defending the rush, especially when all you had to do was make sure that Ashton Jeanty wouldn't break off several tackles. Like, it was very easy to sort of counter that game plan, and they had the athletes to do it, which made the game a little bit less competitive than what most people were expecting. And to make matters worse, that guy was everybody on the media was crying when Ashton Jeanty did not win the Heisman, and that game right there is the exact reason why I don't think he deserved to win the Heisman. We've seen hundreds of players like Ashton. We've never seen anyone like Travis. And really, it was kind of a disappointment, in my opinion, because like all of the high-seeded teams ended up losing after they ended up getting a bye week, and I'm just like, wow, this is this is embarrassing. Like, this is very disappointing. And it's not like a lot of the games were close. Granted, Arizona was the only team that was really close. All of these games ended up being in blowouts, and I'm like, when are we going to actually get a very good competitive college game? Like, most of the time, whenever I turn on the TV and I watch these college playoff games, they were always incredibly competitive, aside from I don't know, maybe Georgia going up against Kansas. That one time that they ended up playing. Maybe that was like the only non-competitive college football playoff game that I had seen in a while. And then come all of these 3 games back to back to back, being nowhere near as competitive as what I was expecting. Like, you'd want them to put up a little bit of a fight, because nobody wants to sit there and watch a game that's just, the team is already 20 points or maybe even 30 points ahead of them, and the team that's down can't get a single thing to go on offense. I think we're finally going to get actual competitive games against actual competitive teams. I think all of these teams have a legitimate shot in winning the college football playoffs entirely, but we'll have to see towards the end. Again, my money is on Notre Dame in this one. I'm really hopeful. Now, the biggest concern to Notre Dame's success, in my opinion, is going to be quarterback play. Their quarterback is not really like a playmaker, not much of a difference maker for their team. He's more of like a game manager, where if it's like how should I put this? If you need a quarterback that you don't want to just mess up or lose the game, then that's your guy. But again, if you need a quarterback to win a game, I don't think that he is going to be your guy. And that's really the problem that I think Notre Dame is going to have to overcome when going up against a stout defense like Penn State, who is most likely going to be able to stop the run. And that's really the big concern that I have for Notre Dame. Like, a lot of people, I'm sure they're going to go ahead and pick Penn State to win in this one, but my money is on Notre Dame. Let me know in the comments who you guys have winning in this game and what you guys think is going to happen. But that's all that I have in the first segment. So now we're going to go into the second segment where I talk about the Falcons and Kirk Cousins, because there have been reports saying that the Falcons are totally fine with having Kirk Cousins come off the bench, and I'm actually very surprised by that. So I'll be right back after this short break to talk a little bit about that. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be talking about the Falcons and the situation surrounding Kirk Cousins and him coming off the bench. So before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, something that you're just dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $sign below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Or you can use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really help the show, make the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. So let's go ahead, get into this second segment where we talk about Kirk Cousins. Ash Own in the chat, he says that he believes that the final score of the college game is going to be 34-20 in favor of the Fighting Irish. There we go. We love to see it. Let's go Notre Dame. I hope that's the end result. That would be a really good game. I hope it doesn't start out Notre Dame being up, or Penn State, whichever it is, being up 20, and then the team makes a comeback. That is cool to watch, but I would like a much closer game and a much more competitive game in the college football playoffs, because we've only seen like one game that was actually really close and competitive, and even then that game wasn't back and forth. I want to see a back and forth game. But more so on the Kirk Cousins situation. So this was a quote directly stated from their GM, Terry Fonteno. Forgive me if I messed up that last name, but he said, quote, "We're very comfortable moving forward with him as a backup." Now, keep in mind, the previous offseason, this is like a terrible picture of Kirk Cousins, by the way, but keep in mind that in this offseason, they signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million contract. That is a lot of money to be given to a backup quarterback. I don't think there has ever, aside from Daniel Jones, I don't think there's ever been another quarterback that has been making that much money coming off of the bench. And Daniel Jones, he 100% deserved that. He deserved to be benched. He deserved to be playing safety. He doesn't even deserve to be in this league, let alone starting for 6 years. But aside from that, Kirk, he's rather promising, and he's obviously way more promising than Daniel Jones, despite losing to him in the playoffs that one time. But a lot of people, they were expecting Kirk. It was a very weird scenario, and it made it even more weird when the Falcons, they ended up deciding to sign Michael Penix Jr. Literally right after they went ahead and pick up Kirk Cousins in free agency. Like, that was very weird and a very odd scenario, because like in my head I was like, okay, well, who's going to end up being the starter? Obviously you have to have Kirk Cousins starting with all of that money, and the fact that they aren't willing to get rid of Kirk Cousins despite paying him all of that money, I think it's a huge waste. Like, I'm not saying that Kirk Cousins, is deserving of the starting position, especially after Michael Penix led a rather clutch legacy drive against Washington and, tying the game up at the end of the day. But really, this was it was very odd, like, this entire move, and allowing them to, keep him despite not playing him. It's so weird. And Ash is in the chat saying, I do have slight concerns with Notre Dame's special teams. Texas head coach made ASU closer than it should have been. Yes, he did. Also, the kicker missed a 2 clutch field goals that would have ended the game and not send it into overtime. But, these kickers in college, they're still very human. And there's also Boise State has special team issues. Yes, they did, but again, the big issue was the fact that Ashton Jeanty was invisible that entire game. That was the biggest issue that Boise State had. Like, it doesn't matter. You have to score. Your team isn't going to rely on special teams to win the game. They're going to rely on your Heisman consideration running back to win the game at the end of the day. But back on this Kirk Cousins thing, I mean, there were a lot of expectations that he was going to be released, and they would have gotten rid of all that dead money that they're going to be using, but apparently not. Like, they're not going to plan on, getting rid of Kirk Cousins, which I think is very, very weird. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. Do you guys think it's unnecessary to be paying a quarterback $180 million just for him to sit on the bench? Like, props to his agent. I really have to say props to Kirk Cousins' agent, because Kirk Cousins' agent is like Hall of Fame agent by being able to get this contract for Kirk Cousins. That's really ridiculous. But Fontana, the GM of the Falcons, he ended up surviving in his in his role despite 4 straight losing seasons. And he oversaw a widely criticized plan that ended up featuring the Falcons giving Cousins $90 million guaranteed and then drafting Michael Penix. Like, it's weird how he has not been fired by having both of those moves and being able to double down on keeping Kirk Cousins. And not only that, Penix was a top 10 pick. Like, it wasn't like they ended up drafting Penix like out of pity or anything like that. He was a top pick, and he was expected to be a very competent quarterback. And so far, I think he's been pretty solid at that role. And props to him for drafting him. But again, after signing a quarterback making that much money, that's weird. And it's Kirk has been awful in the last few games that he played. I think he had a touchdown to interception ratio of 0-6, which is very, very bad. And Ash Owen says, we see it all the time in the NFL. Bye teams come out flat. Look at first half in all the games. I completely understand that, and I know that we've seen that several times in the NFL. But again, you'd expect them to at least put up some sort of a challenge. That just did not happen in any of the games aside from Arizona. It was very odd, and it looked like each team that had the first round bye didn't belong there. That's sort of what I got from that. Now, obviously, Kirk Cousins' contractual neighborhood are not backups, and for the fact that he's immobile also doesn't help his situation. And no quarterback with a salary of $12.5 million is a backup and coming off the bench. That's just not possible. And another thing that's making it really difficult for the Falcons is that, because Ash Owen mentioned trade value, they it's going to be very hard to encourage trading Kirk Cousins, especially with that contract now. Given how he played in his last few games, it's going to be very unlikely that teams are going to be willing to trade for him and continue to pay him all of that money. Very, very unlikely. And Kirk Cousins is due to count $40 million against the Falcons' cap in this year alone. The Falcons keeping him would also leave them on a hook for an additional $10 million guaranteed due on March 17th. The team is probably going to look for a little bit of an escape to avoid that final payment in his contract by designating the QB as a post June 1st cut. And that measure would split all of the dead money that he's going to accumulate over the 2 off seasons, helping the Falcons after their 2024 mistake. The $65 million penalty would check in second all-time by a substantial margin in terms of a single player dead money hit, and Russell Wilson is the only quarterback that leads in that category, where he had an $83 million plus dead money charge set that he hit in the Broncos payroll soon. Like, that's really what's going to happen. So the Falcons any hope that the Falcons have in trading Kirk Cousins is going to probably involve an NFC South team paying most of it to facilitate a deal. And, it's going to be very difficult to encourage teams to trade for Kirk Cousins with how bad that he's been playing. It's going to be very, very difficult. And Cousins cannot be cut until after the Super Bowl, and no post-June 1st releases can take place until the start of the 2025 league year on March 12th. And this gives Atlanta some time to, even though the odds are against a trade coming to pass. Like, this will give them time, but again, I don't know if they're going to be able to pull a trade off. And yes, for a time, Kirk Cousins did elevate the passing game compared to where it was with Marcus Mariota and with Desmond Ridder, but that's not really saying much because both of those quarterbacks are less than meh. And it's difficult. He had like one of the worst late season performances of any quarterback in my opinion, aside from Daniel Jones. Really, Daniel Jones was stinky. He was terrible, and this is really just the biggest problem. Like, I don't know why, in the first place, that contract should not have been a single thing in the discussion books for Atlanta. If you are planning on drafting a quarterback that high in the draft, you do not need to be paying a quarterback $180 million. That just does not make any sense. And maybe if he was younger, but the fact that he is really, for the quarterback position, relatively old, it did not make sense to be giving him that much money if you were going to draft a younger quarterback in the first place. So they really shot themselves in the foot there with that. Now, if he would have played well, then obviously this is a completely different story. But banking your money on a quarterback that old who has not really had an impactful season for any of the franchises that he's been on is a little bit blasphemous, at least in my opinion. Again, this is a quarterback that lost to Daniel Jones. Like, it sounds crazy, but that's all that I really have to say in this second segment. So now we're going to go into the third segment where I give an update on the Jimmy Butler trade situation and exactly what's going on there. I really think that there's going to be a lot of updates going into the end of this week until Jimmy Butler gets traded. And I'm just going to keep updating you guys on what's going on with that. So I'll be right back after the short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, Now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be giving an update on the Jimmy Butler trade scenario, like what's going on, what sort of obstacles is Jimmy Butler going to have to face with this trade, and also what teams he's interested in being traded to. So this is like arguably the biggest story in the NBA right now. Where will Jimmy Butler go after like the relationship between Jimmy and the Miami Heat have seemed to have dissipated? And it has been reported that now Jimmy Butler has already made his decisions on which team he would like to get traded to, and given his recent trade request. So he said that according to Jake Fisher and several league sources, they believe that Jimmy Butler wishes for a team up with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker over in Phoenix. And teams like the Grizzlies and the Bucks are being informed that they should not trade for Jimmy Butler, and the Suns seem like a more realistic destination each and every day that he remains on the Heat. Quote, "The Suns are the destination Butler desires on the other side of his standoff with the Heat," Fisher said. Quote, "You hear the same sentiment even from executives with teams that have been mentioned as potential Butler suitors." And both the Suns and the Heat have the financial pieces to make the deal with Jimmy Butler, so it definitely could work. And let me just go ahead and read some of the comments. Ash Owen again, he says, "Penix looked good at the end of the season. No way the Browns keep Watson as a starter next year as well." That's also true, but again, I feel like that deal was more of a problem with what goes on with Watson off the court, off the field, more so than it does with what Watson does on the field. Again, no one really expected Watson to have such a drastic fall off like he did. But again, still the worst contract in the history of the NFL, without a doubt. But back on the Jimmy Butler situation, again, they have the pieces to make the deal work, and it would likely end with a swap of Bradley Beal. But Beal's no trade clause could make this could make the deal all that more difficult, because Bradley Beal could just decide to waive that trade entirely. And while some reports have stated that the Heat are a team Beal could waive, his agent Mark Bartelstein, forgive me if I messed up that last name, released a statement saying there have been no discussions about trades with the Suns or any other team. Bradley's total focus is on helping the Suns turn things around, which is a little bit difficult considering how Bradley Beal is coming off of the bench. And let's be real here, do we really think that Bradley Beal wants to continue having a role that puts him on the bench? I don't think so. And the Suns and the Heat, they're two teams that are in desperate need of a change before the deadline. Miami is the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, only one game above 500, and the Suns are currently in the 12th seed, completely out of the playoffs entirely as of right now. Butler could help reinvent Phoenix on both sides of the ball, while getting him out of Miami would kickstart a much-needed rebuild for the team. However, rebuilding with Bradley Beal, I think Bradley Beal has already done enough of that rebuilding in Washington, and he does not want to be a part of that again. So, very, very, very difficult scenario that Jimmy Butler is in right now with the Miami Heat. But I do think that Miami Heat, they do need to trade him, because if they will not trade him, then eventually Jimmy Butler is just going to leave in free agency. He could decline his player option, which would allow another team to sign him in the free agency, and most likely, or unlikely, depends, there's going to be a team that is going to be willing to pay Jimmy Butler the money that he wants, as opposed to Miami that doesn't want to pay the money that Jimmy Butler wants. Ash owned Brock Osweiler, Russell Wilson, Derek Carr. We have seen it in the past. Yes, we've seen it in the past, but again, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a good move. And for somebody who's, again, I still think that Russell Wilson, he has talent. Like, at the time that happened, I still believe that he had talent. But with somebody like Kirk, Like, you can't really compare Kirk Cousins to Russell Wilson. And Derek Carr, like, you could definitely do that comparison. Derek Carr is probably, like, the best loser in in NFL history. I'm sorry to say that, but it sounds funny, but genuinely Derek Carr to me feels like the best loser in the history of the NFL. He always seems to play well in some games, and even in games where he still ends up losing and he tends to play well, but then he'll have like a lot of stinker performances, which again, the best loser in the NFL. It's so weird to say that, but that's really what it feels like with Derek Carr. And I get it, we've seen it in the past, but again, drafting a quarterback that high, if you knew you were going to do that, I don't know why you end up paying a quarterback that much money. Like, that is a lot of money to be paying him. But anyways, back to the Jimmy Butler stuff. Again, Miami, they have to get rid of him. They have to trade him now. Like, they don't want to be in the same. It ended up working out for the Clippers, like when the Clippers decided to just not pay Paul George and Paul George just walked. But you also have to think, like, the Clippers, they could have gotten pieces had they have traded Paul George before his contract expired. And it's better for you to get something out of a big-time free agent who was playing really well at that time. And Watson was awful before he got hurt. A lot of people were thinking that Watson was going to be like the next face of the league, that he was that guy, and that he was going to be a star quarterback in today's NFL, even before all of the off-court stuff happened. Like, and even then, when those field stuff, I keep saying off-court, I'm sorry. Even when those off-field stuff did happen, people still had faith that he was going to be a quarterback that was competent enough to maintain a starting position. But nobody, I guarantee you, nobody expected him to fall off like this. Nobody expected that. I didn't expect that. I'm glad that it did happen, however, but again, nobody expected Watson to fall off the way that he did. But you don't want to, in terms of basketball right now, you don't want to just let Jimmy Butler walk when you can get some sort of value out of him before he decides to leave. And whether or not Jimmy Butler is going to try and push them to make the deal is still remain to be seen. Because remember when Jimmy Butler was on Minnesota, when he was happy there for a minute, and then he was not happy there afterwards when he was playing with those young guys and their inability to play defense. He was screaming. He was mad. He was like, you guys effing need me. And he ended up beating the starters with the third string, which is honestly one of the coolest things I think Jimmy Butler has ever done. Probably the best thing that he's ever done in his career. And he sort of forced his way out by, doing this, doing that. I remember there was this one instance when he was up against the Warriors on the Timberwolves, that the Warriors, they were like waving their towels in a circle, and Jimmy Butler ended up doing the exact same thing, letting everyone know that he wanted out. And how did the Heat win without Butler yesterday? My knowledge of basketball is limited. I was going to talk about that in a later segment, but I might as well go ahead and do that anyway. Let me just go right ahead and find it. Now, the Heat, they did not play yesterday. I do not see their game coming up on the schedule, so they did not play yesterday. I think you mean the game that happened before on Tuesday when they went up against the Golden State Warriors. Like, I think that's the game that you're talking about. Simply put, the Warriors, they're not as good of a team as people thought that they were. That's really the big reason why they ended up losing that game. And it's not like the Heat had any dominant scores in that game, but to be fair, when Steph Curry is the only player that's dropping 30 points and the rest of the team can't even get close to 20, that's a big flaw. And the Warriors as a team, they ended up shooting 14 for 50 from the three-point line, which is 28%. That's not going to let you win a bunch of basketball games if you're shooting that badly. Compared to Miami, who shot 16 for 40, which is 40%, it's very difficult to win when you're shooting that badly from three. and you're just wasting possessions. Again, there were only two players on the Warriors that ended up hitting multiple three-pointers, and those two players were Steph Curry and Buddy Hield, excuse me. And Buddy Hield, he only made 2 3-pointers. Buddy Hield is like such a conundrum. There's like a cycle that Buddy Hield goes through. It's like he plays really well on a new team, balls out, and then people question why he gets traded and why he got traded. Then he goes through a terrible slump, and then that's when people realize why he got traded, and then he gets traded again. That's usually the cycle that Buddy Hield goes through. And right now, we are on the cycle stage of where people realize why Buddy Hield gets traded, because he is so inconsistent. He was great at the start of the season, but now he's completely fallen off. And the rest of the Warrior squad has fallen off with that as well. So, did not expect to do a recap this early. But again, with the Jimmy Butler scenario, if you're Miami, you got to get rid of him. And you got to do it now. So that's all that I have in the in this third segment. That's all the time that I can muster. And now in the fourth segment, we are going to go ahead and talk about the what UCLA's head coach had to say after losing to Michigan and the Wolverines by almost 20 points. So we're going to talk about that because what he had to say was actually rather surprising. I did not expect him to go into a post-game interview with these comments. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this, in this fourth segment, we're going to talk about UCLA's head coach, Mick Cronin, and what he had to say in a post-game interview, because I think it's very surprising. The media also thinks it's very surprising. It made several headlines with what he had to say after the loss to the number 4 ranked team in basketball, the Michigan Wolverines. And the final score of this game was 94-76 in favor of the Wolverines, of course. And their coach was not happy. UCLA's coach was not happy with this. And could this have been easily avoided? Could this loss have been avoided? Yes, it could have been avoided because UCLA did end up making the game close, but then they let the game slip away. Now, Tuesday night against the Wolverines, UCLA fell big in the first half and then dug itself into a hole, and they had to try and retake the lead, which they did before getting blown out. So when you're able to retake a lead like that and you still end up getting blown out, that is a huge missed opportunity in my opinion. And this was also at home. So after their home loss, Cronin, he kept it real on the in the post-game interview, and he unleashed some of the harshest criticism I've ever seen from a head coach on their team. Like, this is really crazy what he had to say. So he said, quote, "I'd say a combination, to be fair." He was asked a question whether it was Michigan's unique size and skill or defensive breakdowns that were the main reason why the Bruins ended up giving up 94 points at home. So he said, "I'd say a combination, to be fair to your question. Obviously, they shot the ball well, but we're soft." And when a head coach says that their team is incredibly soft, the way I see it, you may or may not have lost the locker room if you're saying that your team is that soft. And we're too soft to play hard enough, Cronin said. Even in the crucials, you can't get an offensive rebound. It's like a 5-point game, and Kobe Johnson just has a guy take the ball from him. Same thing with Sebastian Mack. Okay, we finally do get a stop, can't get a defensive rebound. They didn't have a million of them because they didn't miss that many shots, but there were a few in particular. Kobe, Sebastian, Hugh back-breaking, and you get inside position. So don't tell me you want to win. Don't tell me that you want to win. And then he continues, to start the game, Tyler gave up 12 points, 2 screens, he didn't say a word. Threes, and then he got dunked on 3 times. So don't tell me you want to win. We're soft. Aside from, to be fair to you, obviously they have a unique skill set, the way they shot the ball, but we're soft. He continued saying that. He continued saying that throughout most of this. And this was and this was only the beginning of what he had to say with this team. And he's won almost 500 games and said he was upset with everybody, including his assistant coaches. He said, the truth of it has been, it's really hard to coach people that are delusional. Yes, he said this in a post-game interview. He said that. He said that his players are completely delusional, which is, I don't think any head coach has ever said that about their own players. And to be fair, this is really good constructive criticism, at least in my opinion. Like, there are going to be people who say that this isn't how you coach a team, but this isn't how you coach a team that's soft. Because teams that aren't soft, they're going to take this criticism and they're going to prove the head coach wrong and completely flip the opinion on what the media and what the coach has to say about them. Like, that is what a good team and that is what a team that isn't soft is going to do. But since he knows that they're soft, saying that this team is soft and exposing them like this might end up proving to be the downfall of the team, and he might have just lost the locker room like this. And Cronin said, the hungry dog gets the bone. We got guys that think they're way better than they are. They're nice kids, but they're completely delusional about who they are, and the team that's mind is on the right stuff. And hungry to get a win in conference play is the team that is probably going to win. Right now, if this wasn't the humble pie they needed, then I don't know. Cronin is who he is, and he's not going to change his ways, obviously. And in the media, if your beat is UCLA, you love how open Cronin is and the content you can get and the content that you can create off of these comments that he has to say. Because again, he's like, how do I compare him to someone in the NFL, really? I mean, probably like the most accurate one is based off of the stories is probably Bill Belichick, because I mean we've seen Tom Brady and all of the Patriots, they like tell stories about how Belichick coaches and what he has to say, and a lot of the times Belichick is very, very mean. And there's also several other former Patriot players who have said, on that team, you do not have an identity. You are just a player on the rotation, and you are easily interchangeable. Like, it's not like you can have an ego on the Patriots. Like, you work towards a goal, and that goal is winning. And if you're playing bad, you are going to hear it from Bill. And Tom Brady even made a joke about Bill Belichick in recruiting. He said, like, Bill Belichick would probably say something like, all right, are you going to come to North Carolina? Are you going to come or not? We really don't need you, but, like, are you going to? Like, something along those lines. But again, like, whichever side of the debate you're going to fall on, you can probably agree that Cronin does appear to be a bit of a crossroads with this season. And before you say, oh, but didn't he recruit these players? No, he did not recruit these players. It should be noted that the head coach in college doesn't necessarily do most of the recruiting. It's left to the scouts, and it's left to the assistant coaches as well as to who they think would be a great addition to the roster. That is not something that the head coach necessarily does. And that's probably a big reason why he was mad at his assistant coaches for like drafting these not drafting, but recruiting these players that are soft, because it's like you do not want a team that is like that is constructed like that. Modern NBA is hard to watch. So many teams chucking threes all the time. That's how the game works. That's how it's evolved. And to be fair, that is the most efficient shot that you can get on a basketball court, constantly shooting these corner threes and trying to run pick and rolls, allowing you to get an easy shot in the paint. That's just how it works. Teams have gotten more efficient. Teams have been able to defend it a lot better. And people and teams, they've realized that taking an 18-foot shot, which is the same points as taking a layup, is not that impressive and is not going to win you games. Taking three-pointers is what's going to get you to win games. And now, back on UCLA, last year the Bruins went heavy on international players to replenish its roster, and it didn't work. Cronin's run of 12 straight NCAA appearances came to an end. And for this season, NIL efforts were stepped up, and the Bruins hit the transfer portal hard to reshape the lineup. Despite losing 3 of its last 4, they are still in a decent spot at 11-4 overall and 2-2 in the Big Ten. So, how will the players react to Tuesday's presser, and how might it be used against Cronin in recruiting are going to be like the real questions. But the way that I see it, these criticisms are very just. If you are giving up offensive rebounds and you're acting like you're not trying to win these games, then yeah, you're going to get hit with that, you're soft. And that's really also another problem with the NBA. The fact that these players are incredibly soft, and the fact that these players, they flail their body around to try and get to the foul line. Like, you're not going to be able to win in college if you're playing soft and if you're playing like how the coach has described you playing. Now, I did not watch this game, so I have no idea how they were playing. But again, if you are able to cut through a lead and take the lead, if you're down by a lot of points and you're able to cut back and come back to take the lead in a game where you're down by so many points, blowing that lead and making it a blowout game once again is absolutely inexcusable. And if there are players in the locker room that genuinely feel like they are better than what they actually are, I wasn't in the locker room, so I have no idea. But if that's what the coach is saying, then maybe they do need a little bit of a wake-up call in saying that you're not the main character, or you're not that guy. Like, that's sort of what a lot of players might need, especially in today's NBA. Like, God help me. But that's all that I really had in this 4th segment. I just wanted to bring that into conversation, because I thought like those comments, they were surprisingly harsh, at least in today's basketball. Because again, you don't really hear a lot of head coaches say some of these things like that. You usually keep it in the locker room, but he went and told the whole media. So again, that's all that I have to say. So now we're going to go into an NBA recap of yesterday's games, because there were a lot of them. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the 5th segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. But before we get into this NBA recap, I just got a report saying that the Suns are ready to offer Jimmy Butler a 2-year, $121 million extension if they're able to trade for him. So it seems like that might be the go-to move for Jimmy Butler right now. And I was literally just talking about this like 15 minutes ago. And if they are willing to do this, then they're just going to have to hope that Bradley Beal does not use his no trade clause. But if they're able to get a trade done, then this might be a really huge shift in the NBA's Western Conference. It might have just gotten all that more competitive, and it's crazy how competitive this is. And also, in other reports, Zay Flowers is going to be out of the wild card round when the Ravens go up against the Steelers. This report came out 32 minutes ago, but I just saw this. So those are just some reports that I wanted to bring up. Now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this NBA recap. So we're going to start with the Knicks. They ended up beating the Raptors. They won 112-98. No Karl-Anthony Towns in this one, no problem. OG Anunoby dropped 27 points. Josh Hart had 21 and 11. Oh, wait, no, I lied. There was Karl-Anthony Towns in this one. I thought he was still injured. That's my bad. But Karl-Anthony Towns ended up dropping 27 and 13. And on the Toronto side, obviously this team is still trying to tank for Cooper Flagg so they could actually have a winning season. But so no need to really talk about that game all that much because, again, the Knicks were going to be the favorites with or without Karl-Anthony Towns. The Pistons, they ended up beating the Nets 113-98, and let's see here. Tobias Harris, he only had 9 points. Nobody really did a lot of scoring for the Pistons, but it was more so of a team effort. And for the Nets, Noah Clowney ended up dropping 29 points out of nowhere. But, of course, it was all for nothing. Now, the 76ers, they ended up beating Washington because, of course, they did. Washington is a really bad team. And Maxey had 29 points. There was no Joel Embiid in this one, no Paul George in this one either, but, of course, no problem. Kyle Kuzma only had 16 points, and the lack of Jordan Poole was also a big reason why Washington ended up losing in that game. Now, the big one, the Cavs, they ended up snapping the Thunder's 15-game winning streak and beat them 129-122 in the final box scores. Evan Mobley had 21 and 10. Jarrett Allen had 25 and 11. Donovan Mitchell only had 11, and Darius Garland only had 18. And they showed that they were able to go up against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's 31-point performance. Jalen Williams had 25 points in this game. And one thing that I will say, though, is that there should be a little bit of an asterisk because, again, there is no Chet Holmgren. But nonetheless, both of these teams are very, very competitive, and they both have a very good shot of making it to the NBA Finals. Now, the Bulls, they ended up losing to the Pacers. The Pacers won 129-113. Siakam had 26 points. Halliburton had 16 and 13. Thomas Bryant had 22 points. And on Chicago's side, Zach LaVine had 31 because, of course, he did. And, of course, he's still dropping 31 points on a meaningless squad. And Ash Owen went in the chat. He said he went on rants when he was Cincinnati's coach. Yeah, of course. But, again, you don't really, at least right now, you don't really, go flat out and say my players are soft. I don't think I've seen a coach do that. And anyways, back into the recap. The Pelicans, they still keep losing, and despite the fact that they have all of their good players in, they lost with CJ McCollum, with DeJounte Murray, no Zion Williamson, but still losing to the Blazers by 19 points is inexcusable, at least in my opinion. Denny Avdija had 26 points, and Shaedon Sharpe had 21 points. And on the Pelicans side, CJ McCollum had 23, and DeJounte Murray had 20 points. Now, going into the next game, the Nuggets, they ended up beating the Clippers 126-103. Russell Westbrook had a really good game in this one. He ended with 19, 8, and 6, and was able to shoot 8 for 16 from the field. 1 of 5 from 3, but again, he's Russ. We don't really expect him to shoot the 3 ball all that well. Jamal Murray had 21, 9, and 3. Let's see who else played well. Michael Porter Jr. had 19, 8, and 2, and that was basically all she wrote. Now, Norman Powell had 30 points, but it was all for nothing, especially when James Harden can only drop 16 points. Chris Dunn, for some reason, was playing 20 minutes, and he dropped 0 points. Harden was 5 for 15. Amir Coffey, the coffee shop, he was 2 for 11. And the rest of the Clippers, they just shot absolutely horrible from the field when going up against the Nuggets, and that's a recipe for disaster. And finally, the big game of tonight, well, not really the big game, but one of the most viewed games, the Spurs going up against the Milwaukee Bucks. Victor had only 2 highlights in this game where he hit a one-legged three-pointer and a crazy circus shot, and the rest of the game was terrible. He was 4 for 10, only had 10 points and 10 rebounds. A really bad performance for somebody with the high caliber and great play like Victor Wembanyama. Chris Paul had 18 and 7, but again, it wasn't enough to beat Giannis Antetokounmpo, who had 25, 16, and 8. Dame had 26 points along with 8 assists, and Brook Lopez also had 22 points. Chris Middleton has been moved to playing on the bench, and he most likely will not be back in the starting lineup. Portis was 2 for 12. Even despite this, they still were able to win rather comfortably, 121-105. And that's the whole recap. That's all that I have for these NBA games, and that's it for the show. So thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. As usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, something you're dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box. If that's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Either or really helps the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee